Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're delighted to be here with all of you tonight, celebrating Women Talk Money, edited by Rebecca Walker, who is here with us. She is in my upper right-hand corner. I'm not sure where she's showing up for you tonight. Rebecca is the author of several best-selling books. She's a speaker who has appeared at over 400 universities, library conferences, and corporate campuses. She's been a DEI consultant for several Fortune 500 companies as well. She's the co-founder of the Third Wave Fund, an organization that gives grants to women and transgender youth working for social justice. Walker was named by Time magazine as one of the most influential leaders of her generation. She currently lives in Los Angeles, and it always feels like old home week to have Rebecca with us. Thank you so much for coming back to Charis always. She is joined by three contributors tonight. Sonya Renee Taylor is a world-renowned activist, award-winning artist, transformational thought leader, author of 6 books, including the New York Times best-selling and Charis, most importantly best-selling The Body Is Not an Apology, and founder of the international movement and digital media and education company of the same name, whose work has reached millions of people by exploring the intersections of identity, healing, and social justice using radical self-love as a framework. She continues to speak, teach, write, create, and transform, and lives globally. So welcome, Sonya Renee. We're joined by Mandy Len Catron, who is the author of the critically acclaimed essay collection, How to Fall in Love with Anyone. Her work has been translated into more than 30 languages and can be found in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Atlantic, Catapult, The Rumpus, and many others. She is a faculty member in the School of Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia. And finally, Terese Marie Mailhot is from Seabird Island Band. She's the New York Times bestselling author of yet another Charis bestseller, Heartberries, a memoir. So it is a true honor to be here with all of you tonight. One of Charis's deepest feelings is that if we can't talk about money, we can't talk about anything else. Money is related to everything that we do, and certainly is a deep and important feminist topic. So we're delighted to have you all here, and we want to encourage folks to ask questions. So if you have questions about money or for any of these folks, put it in the ask a question box at the bottom center of the screen, and Rebecca will probably pull those in when it's time towards the end. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, ER. That was a beautiful introduction. And it's true. I love being here at Charis. I feel like it is Old Home Week. I have been supported by Charis for the last, I don't know, what would you say, 2 decades, 25 years. I think I did one of my first readings for my first memoir, Black, White, and Jewish, at Charis. So this is a wonderful return, as it is every time. I thank you. I support you. I think it's so important for all of us to support you and small bookstores around the country, especially feminist bookstores that are intersectional and that understand the ways in which we all need to change the story of this country, one book, one sentence, one paragraph at a time. So thanks so much for having me and for supporting this book, and for making space to hear from all of these incredible writers on this subject. Your host, all of you out there tonight, and we are talking about this collection that I have edited called Women Talk Money, Breaking the Taboo. It's my 10th book, unbelievably, and it's really it's not a book that's about, how you should invest your 401k. It's not about how you should balance your checkbook. It's not about any of the kind of, traditional kind of stereotypical books about how you should work with your money in a practical, pragmatic way. It's a collection of essays by women who are really trying to come to terms with their relationships with money in a very personal, emotional, psychologically complex way, in the middle of different cultural narratives, personal narratives, socio-political narratives, and it's a beautiful book. And I started to do this collection in 2008 during the middle of the Great Recession. Some of you remember it, some of you may not. And I started because at that time, so many of us were without money. We were all struggling with money in some way or another. We didn't know how we were going to make ends meet. You know, the whole country, it felt, was really just, it was terrible. And so for the first time in my life, because that was up for so many people, we were just speaking very honestly about it. My cohort, you know, whether people were, you know, working in the business making millions of dollars, or working not in the business and making, you know, hundreds of dollars. Everyone at every level was just opening every conversation with, oh my God, what am I going to do about my financial situation? And that kind of honesty was so refreshing to me. And I started to feel like I was a part of a community, and I started to feel closer to people because we were breaking this taboo and talking about this thing that had been secret. And I realized that I had been holding a place of shame around money myself. And I started to listen to the voices that I was engaged with, and realized that everyone was holding some story, whether they were wealthy women talking about their guilt that they had too much, whether they were women who had enough but were confused about having enough, or felt survivor's guilt because they had enough, whether they're women who didn't have enough, who felt shame, there was something wrong with them because they didn't have enough, women of color who felt that they had been criminalized for having money, because when you're a woman of color, especially a Black woman in this country, you're not supposed to have money. If you were, you know, talking to immigrant women who, you know, had to really take on the narratives of their parents who saved so assiduously to make sure that they got here and that they were set up, and that they then were sort of tracked into a kind of professionalism that was soul killing for them sometimes, but was a part of a larger narrative. You know, so I just kept talking and being fascinated by the ways in which the conversation was so multifaceted and important, right? And feeling that if we could all talk about this, we could change the world. We could change the way we feel about money, think about money, use money, um, and we could be we could be a movement, another faction, another part of the larger movement, you know, just by having these conversations, heal ourselves, heal the planet. So I started to ask all of these women that I love, that whose work I really admire, I should say, to contribute their stories. And so we're joined tonight by three of them who are going to read for about 5 minutes from their pieces. And I'm going to ask them a little bit about their pieces. And then hopefully at the end, you will have questions for them, for me, you know, for all of us. If you want to share your money story, we can integrate that into the conversation. So I hope that sounds good. I can't see any of you, but I'm going to assume that that's good for you. So I'd like to start with Terese. And Terese, do you feel good about starting? And do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit before you start writing, and maybe talk about the process of writing your piece briefly?
Yeah, sure. I was new to money as a writer, and I think the solicitation to write about me came at a good time because, I had just dealt with the idea of shame and trauma, but I hadn't dealt with the idea of shame and money, and like, to me, it's like any time where there's shame or I'm ashamed to reveal something, I have to ask myself, where did I learn that? And also, I guess the other question is, where did this shame come from? And does it belong to me? And it's like, no, like inherited poverty, that does not belong to me. That's systemic. And that's something that a lot of people I love, I wouldn't fault them for struggling. You know what I mean? So,
Yes.
writing about new money and how I can't really overcome systemic issues, or the fact that I'm an Indigenous woman, my family, you can't save everybody. Um, but money changes your life, and writing about that was really complicated. Yeah. So it came at a good time. I wish I had more time to write it, but I think everyone's like that. They wish they could write, for years on an isolated piece. But unfortunately, like, we're women and we have shit to do. So we have to write. Yeah, we have to write. And sometimes we have to write more quickly than we'd like to. Yeah. But yeah, I'm still thankful. And it turned out good. I'm proud
It
of it.
did turn out good. It turned out beautifully.
Yeah.
So let's hear some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. And this is called Royalties. And you'll hear my son playing YouTuber, but I can't get him to stop. Like, that's what keeps him moderately quiet. All right. Before the book, I was poor. The other side of a welfare worker's desk kind of poor. In order to receive assistance, you have to be small and needy. I would make my case and yet not speak up for myself. The seat on the other side of the desk felt like silence. In order to break away from that place in such silence, I wrote a book. The book did well enough that I see staged photos of its cover on influencers' Instagram accounts next to cold brews or succulents I can now afford. And I receive royalties twice a year that are enough to buy a vehicle with, or pay off debt, or support my family for a year. With my first royalties, I thought I could restore myself or reconstitute all the things that had been stripped from me after years of being without. I thought I could bring people back or keep them here. I remember when the first wire came, it was $50,000. My partner and I just stared at our bank account. We're going to see Rhonda. We'll head out tomorrow, I said. Sure. He said it without reluctance. He knew how important my best friend was and how sick she had become. She had been in the hospital for months by then and constantly messaged me to say she was feeling better, not to worry, and that she'd be out any day now. I was used to her being sick. She had Crohn's disease and was always in and out of hospitals, taking treatments, sometimes steroids. The year before, she had reconciled with the fact she wouldn't be able to have kids because of the disease. But it wasn't fatal, not from what I could research. There was always the idea in my mind that she couldn't die from this illness and that its complications are rarely fatal. There was also the idea that something as good as $50,000 would rub off on my entire surroundings and that things might be better for the people around me for good. We went to see her, my two boys, myself, my husband. We all got in the car and drove 15 hours from Indiana to San Antonio. During the ride, I looked up florists and planned how I would fill her hospital room up with flowers. The kids were excited to see her and were kind of glowing with a playful, joking joy between each other. My eldest was happy we'd be staying at Rhonda's house because he loved her pool and her husband, Robert, and her brother-in-law, Mike, and niece, Mia, who all lived there. Every year, my son and I would visit in May so the whole family could hang out for Rhonda's birthday. I was mostly excited about the idea of bringing her flowers. I had been sending them monthly via online order, but they never looked as impressive as they appeared in the pictures advertised. I would finally have a chance to pick the flowers out myself. Somewhere between Indiana and Texas, in the midst of the excitement, there came a small revelation that I could do more with my money to help someone. Shawnee Inyali, a Native woman who went missing close to the Indian band I grew up on. I had seen her missing poster for a few weeks. The faces of missing women are always on my social media timeline. For Native women, we go missing at alarming rates and experience sexual violence at a rate in some communities 10 times higher than the national average. So our timelines are full of missing posters and news reports of violence against people we know. Shawnee was 29 and looked like a cousin of mine. Her cousins were my best friends growing up, And that's how I came to see her poster. My friend Christy asked everyone to share the poster, so I reached out that day to see if I could put up a reward to find her. That's my baby frustrated with geometry jumper. Her family thanked me for the offer and directed me to the RCMP, the Canadian Police in Hope, British Columbia, where she went missing. When I called, the police were mostly unhelpful, telling me that I could make a poster myself to advertise the award, and that if they received a tip, they'd pass along my information to receive the money. During my drive, I made several calls, and my brother was able to make the poster. And within an hour, we were up and sharing the news of the reward. It was liked and shared more than 1,000 times, and it gave me a lot of hope along that drive that maybe money could solve problems like these. Maybe money and placing a monetary value on a woman's life could help find that woman, and things could be different with the more money I made. We stopped at a hotel, and I watched as the shares grew. I slept easier that night, imagining tomorrow would be good for the kids, that a woman might be found. And I let myself be a little naive. I didn't think about the danger and naivete when my whole life I had been aware of it. Something about having money made me less sharp, duller, and simpler. Do you ever have survivor's guilt? A Native woman asked me in Duluth at a book event. I just read for the Indian college there, and she was part of a group of women, the Quaypack, who are runners and all successful women in their own rights. The women had become artists and worked in politics, and they all told me similar stories about how guilty they feel for having things in life. Baby, I'm reading. Go. Even having an iPhone brought them guilt. I understood because we see so many people who don't survive. It's hard to enjoy anything when you think about the people who won't get to know a life away from pain or struggle. My answer was complicated. Their answers were complicated. We all want better for ourselves and our children. Baby, stop getting frustrated. I'm reading. Go to your room. But we leave people behind. We can't take care of everyone. Our mortality rates, the statistics overheads, and the burden of a history of colonization weighs on us. Rhonda experienced a life different from me. And that's where I'll stop. Because am I getting frustrated with geometry jumper?
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, children. We hear you. We know you're there. We believe in you. Go do your geometry. I mean, you know. Anyway, that was so good. Oh, hello. Hi. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that you really touched on a couple of things that I discovered and really came to love about each piece in the book, which is that as women we do different things with money than other people. And the two things that you identify in your piece that I found so moving and resonated so much with me, well, the first one in particular, is we bring beauty in, and I really experienced the flowers, you know, and the understanding that beauty feeds our spirit and feeds our souls. I mean, my grandmother was known throughout the county for her flowers. My mother grows, you know, collard greens like this. You know, when we think about money in my family, our tradition, the sort of matrilineal tradition, is inextricable. It's inextricably linked to beauty and how we need that beauty to survive. Beauty as resistance, beauty as survival in a world that wants to deprive us of beauty and wants us to live in a way and a world that does not feed our spirits. That was very moving to me. And also this idea of using money to save other people, to find other people, to use our money as a voice, an activist voice, to reclaim others who are not seen, who are being abused, who are being disappeared. And so, you know, that is something that came up a lot in many of the pieces, this way that we move with money. And so I want to just thank you for sharing that part. And you want to say something? I feel like you're...
Well, it's just, yeah, beauty and peace. I feel like, you know, we dream about gardens, we dream about land, we dream about taking care of others. Like, not to generalize us, but I think for a lot of Indigenous women, right, that's what we hope for at best, is enough to provide
Yes.
for other people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And land, you know, I think it's going to be interesting to hear from Mandy, because her story, as you find, is about sort of understanding the privilege of the white privilege that comes, or the privilege that she's had because the generations before her had the kind of privilege that white people have had in this country. But it's complicated. It's a little more complicated than that, because they were not wealthy people. They were not, you know, they also struggled very hard to hold on to what they had. And yet, one of the things I love about her piece is this acknowledgement of intergenerational, you know, the ability to build wealth intergenerationally, and what that means, and what it means to take ownership of that as a white person in this country. And so, but for those of us who, especially women of color, you know, Native women, Black women, for us, land, you know, a place that we can own, that we can stand on, that cannot be taken from us. I mean, I think this is true for many, many, many women of all different, but specifically, I think the ache of having our land taken from us, being taken away from our land, put on land that we could never own, having our land be taken from us, being forced from our land, you know. So this idea of land and gardens and a kind of Eden is very resonant for me, and really comes up a lot. And again, when we think about, one of the reasons I wanted to do this book is just to think about what would it be like if women had as much money as we need to change the world in the way that we would want to. And so one of the things that I see is just more and more beauty, and more flowers, and more people having their land that they can work, that they can love, that they cannot be removed from, you know. So thank you for that. Yes. Okay, Mandy, you want to read? How are you feeling?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, should I just jump in?
However you want to roll. You want to talk a little bit about yourself? You want to, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of covered it, Rebecca, which is great. But basically, when Rebecca invited me to write something for this anthology, I was really excited, slightly terrified. I just quit my job to pursue writing full time, and I felt, every time I told someone this, I felt sort of the weight of that that revelation, as like, you know, people would say, like, wow, good for you, you've worked so hard, you really deserve this. And I felt like I had this sort of bump in status, and it made me uncomfortable, because I could see all the ways that luck and privilege had factored into that decision, and it felt like I wanted to explore them. So that's kind of yeah, that's kind of what this is about. So I'll just read the beginning, but it's really sort of sets up this investigation into how intergenerational wealth is established and what it can do, basically. When she was 36, the same age I was when I published my first book, Lucy Catron's husband died in a farming accident, leaving her alone with 4 boys, a mother-in-law, a herd of dairy cows, no driver's license, and $26,000 in debt. Lucy, whose real name, you should know, was Lucilla, was my grandmother. And over the past few months, I haven't been able to stop thinking about all the ways the choices she made during her life have shaped mine. This obsession with Lucy began at a retreat in Palm Springs last May. It was a small gathering where women and non-binary folks met in the desert to eat and dance and talk about things that matter, from sex and parenthood to the opioid crisis and climate change. I'd been to the retreat once before, and everyone I met was so smart and warm and curious that I promised myself I would go back. But when the invitation arrived, I wavered. Spending $1,000 for 3 days in the California desert felt wildly self-indulgent. I just turned 38, and after 2 years of deliberating, I'd finally decided to quit my job. I'd spent the previous decade teaching English at a large university, a job I love, but I wanted to try working full-time as a writer. In the end, I decided I could go to California if I used up my credit card points and skipped the retreat hotel in favor of the Motel 6 next door. That first morning, a woman named Anita led us in a simple meditation. As you close your eyes and focus on your breath, I want you to think about all the people who made it possible for you to be here in this room today, she said. With each inhale, try to focus on one of those people. And with each exhale, offer that person your gratitude. I took a deep breath and thought of Lucy. Lucy, whom I called Granny until she died when I was 13. Lucy, from whom I inherited my chin and my cowlick, but whose life looked so different from mine. It was 1962 when a beam fell from a loft in the barn and hit my grandfather on the head, killing him instantly. When I was 36 and leaving for a book tour I had fantasized about for years, it felt like my life was just beginning. But at that same age, the only life my grandmother had known was ending. In 2015, I sold my first book, a collection of essays about love and love stories, for what was, by all accounts, a lot of money. It was, as my agent Sam put it, the kind of money that can change your life. And it changed mine. I was on my way to a friend's house in the suburbs when Sam called to say that a publisher was interested in the book. "Are you driving?" he asked. "You might want to pull over for this." I parked on the side of a steep hill and sat down on the curb. "So," he paused. "Simon & Schuster made an offer." I was silent, terrified that saying anything would somehow break the spell. "Do you want to know how much?" "I think so," I said. "They're offering $350,000, but I think we can ask for more." I genuinely do not remember what I said in response, though it was probably something like, "Holy shit." I only remember a moment of shock, followed by the quick thought that $350,000 could buy an enormous amount of writing time. I immediately understood that my life as a writer, which had up to that point been shaped by a careful toggle between earning money and making time, could become a different thing entirely. I could take a year off from teaching to finish writing the book. I could buy a keyboard and a mouse and a laptop stand and sit at my dining room table every day, transforming words into sentences. When my neck got sore from too many hours at the computer, I could pay to see a chiropractor. If my 15-year-old car died, I could replace it. If I decided to have a kid, I could afford childcare. I could do all of this and still write. The future changed shape in an instant. And I'll stop there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I love the way, I think one of the things that I started to do when I started to become more aware of this dynamic with around money is I started to be very transparent about numbers, like to talk about numbers all the time. Like I made this amount of money doing this, I made this, and to really ask other people to join me in that conversation because the transparency itself felt so important. And I noticed how resistant people were, and still are. People don't want to do that. They're very nervous. They're afraid they're going to be judged. They're afraid that they have all kinds, who knows what they're feeling. But it's been a part of my practice to be very, very open about these things. And one of the things I love about both of your pieces that you just read is that you were very transparent about the amount of money that you were dealing with. And I think for women in particular, that is not, it's not comfortable. It's very uncomfortable to just put that out there, to just say it. And for a lot of men, they don't have that at all. I mean, I talk to people, I mean, there's a lot, I don't want to generalize, but generally, the, there's a kind of, pride and like a kind of flip way, well, yeah, I just made a cool, 50,000 on some crypto. I just, my last deal was $1.5 million, and my this had the, and I just sold my house and made $400,000 in 3 months. I mean, there's a kind of familiarity and comfort around being able to talk about money from a place of entitlement and pride and even a sense of, and I'm going to keep making more, you know what I mean? And like, that's what it's about, and I think that's important for us to recognize and also to embrace the part of that which gives us a sense of abundance and the belief that we're going to be able to keep making money and having money, and that money is a good thing. It's neutral, in itself, and it can be used for all the things that we want it to be used for time, for children, for flowers, for land, for deconstructing capitalism, And so I love that you both have done that. And Mandy, I love about your piece as well, the way in which, and you do this later on very specifically, the way you talk about the reason that you were able to get the money that you had is because of what your mother did and what her mother did. And that kind of honesty, because so often in our country, white people, people of privilege, do not want to acknowledge the fact that they only have that privilege because they were able to have it for generations before in ways that we have not been able to. And so I really, I'm glad that you did that. It was one of my favorite parts of your piece. And it was one of the things I fought, I mean, everybody had a tough time writing these pieces, as the three of you, I think, didn't have that. Well, Terese, everybody had their, it was very hard. We started with 50 and we got down to 29 because people, it was hard. But it was that kind of honesty that I was really looking for, and that I think needs to be in the world. So thank you for that. And Terese and Sonya, do you want to say anything to Mandy, or Mandy, do you want to say anything else? Do you want to have any kind of exchange about anything?
I
don't want to feel
think
like
the thing that that I would add, just to sort of like build on what you're talking about, is like my obsession with my grandmother is really like sort of thinking about how just like the smallest things that she did, the financial choices that she made, like had these huge downstream effects for me. Like one of the biggest things was that she had 4 boys, and my father was the youngest by far. And so the older ones, after my grandfather died, they just, moved out, and she got a job working in the high school cafeteria so that she could basically figure out what to do about my dad's education. And she took night classes and she worked off this debt, and then she got into a position where she was the secretary at his school. She changed his classes from agriculture to business, and she basically like convinced him to go to college. And that was a small thing that ultimately made it possible for me to grow up in this very middle class lifestyle compared to the previous generations. And because my dad then became a high school principal, I knew how to succeed in the school system. And it's just like these little tiny things that made a big difference. Because I knew how to succeed in the school system, I then like got a scholarship to college. And then because of that, I didn't have a lot of debt when I graduated. So I was able to do an MFA. You know, it's just like, and then I could support myself writing because I just didn't need that much money to live. And so just sort of thinking about how these are not things that I did. They weren't my choices. They were choices that previous people had made that I really benefited from. And I think like when we talk, like the original title I had for this piece was like on hard work, because I was so frustrated with people talking about hard work without sort of being able to see that hard work is built on this bigger sort of systemic situation. And like it doesn't, you know, success is hard work is such a small part of that, basically.
Yes, because if hard work could make us rich, we would be some of the richest people in the world. Women of color, we would be, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, because all we do is hard work, and that's all we've ever done in this country is hard work. So yes, I'm so glad. I'm so sorry that we had to change your title. I don't
No,
remember
I
why
like
we
the
changed
current
it.
title.
But you know, titling is something. I mean, we could have a whole conversation. Last night we had a conversation about, you know, the publishing industry, and that's a whole other thing to talk about. Titles are a big part of that. But I like that title. But I like both of the titles, but I'm glad that you brought that into the conversation, because it is important and it is at the core of what you're writing about. So thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I love
It's
being a part of it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Sonya, you're up. You ready?
Yep, I think I'm ready. First of all, thanks for having me. It's been a delight to get to hear both Terese and Mandy's pieces. Those are really, really beautiful. And it was good to hear them in your voices. That was powerful. So my piece is called Having Plenty. And I feel like the discussion, I would say like 2013, 2014 is when I began to explore my own relationship with money. And it sort of came out of necessity. It was like I had moved to California and I moved to what I thought was a really awesome house, but it was like, you know, 1 block away from Bullet Wound Boulevard. And it was a lot of drama. And I was like, oh, I can't live like this anymore. And I was in the Bay Area and I didn't have a credit score that would allow me to move. And so all of a sudden, my sense of safety and all these things were tied to my bills and my student loans and this credit score and all of this stuff. And so I started exploring like, all right, what's my contribution? What's my energetic contribution to the circumstance I'm in? And that began an entire inquiry and like, oh, where does my money story come from? What's my trauma around money that I need to clear? Because yes, there are all these systemic things. Like we can talk about why I can't find a house because of a credit score, right? I'm like, right, I didn't pay the Discovery bill so I could pay my rent, right? Like we can have that conversation. But for me, I don't want to be an additional aid in the systemic oppression that is already around me. And so my part of that is what can I heal in my own work so that I can move those things out of the way. And this piece ended up being a big part of the discovery of that. So
Good.
In 1986, my mother, 5'3" and shrinking in frame daily, stood in the living room of our military housing apartment and handed me a $100 bill, crisp as the first bite of December air. She said, Sonya, here, take this money and go to the toy store and get you and your brother the presents you want for Christmas. I cannot recall if shame or secrecy tinged her voice, not that it mattered. In those days, both hung in our home like curtains. I looked at the small fortune resting in my 10-year-old palm and considered how I had never seen nor held so many zeros in a solo note, at least not outside of Monopoly money. The biggest bill ever belonging to me at that point was a $20 bill, a single 2 and a single 0 given only on exceptional birthdays from well-to-do aunties and my father's childless workmates. But my mother had just placed what felt like all the world's wealth, a $100 bill in my hand, and trusting the whole of Christmas to me. Today, I know that she had given me only 1/7 of the check my father had mailed to her, separate from the monthly bills, from a naval aircraft carrier floating in the Indian Ocean. When I was a child, my parents didn't tell me about the family finances. I didn't need to know. I was a kid. Only decades later would my father share how much money he sent that year. Today, I know we were supposed to have $700 worth of Christmas gifts. Today, I know $700 is the equivalent of $1,603.78 adjusted for 32 years worth of inflation. We were supposed to have plenty. But I was 10 years old enough to know Santa was made up and young enough to still wish he wasn't. I was old enough to know what I'm hungry felt like and to wonder why I was buying Christmas presents when the fridge had little more than an assortment of caked and dried jellies, ketchup, and Miracle Whip with no bread, meat, or potatoes to put them on. And still, I was 10 years old, young enough to be proud of the fact that my mother had given me all our riches and tasks and a task of grown-up size proportions, make Christmas happen. The mission was to go to the military-based toy store and return with a skull and bones skateboard for myself, just like the one Jason, my best friend Rizzalin's boyfriend, rode in the neighborhood on Saturday mornings, and a He-Man Castle Grayskull slime pit, the one my brother had been raving about for nearly 2 months. I made the executive decision that my brother and I would each get a single item from the toy store, the one we desired the most, not because we were a family prone to modest holidays. Historically, we had epic Christmases with racetracks, games, puzzles, bikes, dolls, and clothes galore scattered beneath an enormous tree laden with lights and ornaments. We were getting only one item each because we were no longer in history. We were in 1986, in the height of the crack 80s, the days of missing dinners and dirty laundry stacked higher than both me and my brother's bodies, the days of missing school for days and looking at the locked door of my mother's bedroom until late in the afternoon. If we were lucky, her friends would come over at some point bearing McDonald's Happy Meals for my brother and me. As the adults retreated to the bedroom for hours, my brother and I ate cheeseburgers in front of the television in the living room. This Christmas, we would only get one gift each because I was 10 years old, not enough to know all the cost of the family bills, but old enough to know that we were not in times of plenty, and I should probably act like it. Our small Northern California suburb of Alameda seemed to hide Christmas like a secret tucked in the pocket of sunshine and clear skies. I didn't even wear a jacket as I walked to the Toys R Us on the naval base, crossing the railroad tracks, walking along empty lots closed off with chain link fences. Arriving on the Navy base, I eyed a small ice cream shop sandwiched between the Navy Exchange, a Walmart-style military department store, and the toy store. A double scoop of delicious creamy goodness seemed appropriate remuneration for the high level of grown-upping for which I had been tasked. I entered the store, my forehead barely clearing the height of the freezer case, and ordered a double scoop of cookies and cream on a sugar cone. The act seemed simple enough. It was mature of me to order and pay for my own ice cream, but not nearly as adult as the Christmas shopping. 30 years later, the face behind the counter remains a blur, their gender and age swallowed by the mouth of time, but I remember their voice, shrill and adult. Not like I was pretending to be, but an actual grown-up. And the adult called out the price I owed, $2.50, and I beamed up at them, prideful and rich, my pocket full of plenty. I reached in my blue jeans and handed over the quadrupled folded $100 bill my mother had given me less than an hour earlier. Incredulously, they unfolded the flat green face of Benjamin Franklin, held it up to the light. Again, I do not recall the person's face, but the voice is permanently etched. A bark, a demand, an accusation. Where did you get this? And I'll stop there.
Yes. Yeah. So, I love that piece. And I think it's a good parallel piece with Latham Thomas's piece in the book. Latham writes about her experience watching her mother, who was a real estate agent, go into a bank to cash her commission check, which was, I think, $20,000, Black woman. And the teller did not think that she had made that money legally and called the police. And the Oakland police came and handcuffed her and dragged her out of the bank. And that was Latham's first experience of seeing what it was like for a Black woman to have money and what the treatment would be like. And I think that your pieces really speak to one another because both of you had this trauma of being really confronted and judged and dismissed and undermined, you know, this idea that you did not deserve it, you must have stolen it, how dare you have it, you are not supposed to have money, little Black girl, you are not supposed to have money. And the ways in which we carry that feeling, you know, throughout our life until we resolve it in one way or another. And your piece is so moving because not only do you start to unpack it for yourself in this piece, but you write about the process of turning it into a larger community process and method for working through this kind of trauma. And you end up, I love the end of your piece, when you allow your friends to buy you ice cream. And because you feel that you are able to accept the generosity, the abundance, whereas before you had so much wrapped up in that sense, you know, that the shame and the constriction and you know, the sort of complicated emotions, but that finally there was a release and a sense that you will be cared for and that you can care for yourself. Yes, you got there, but also part of caring for yourself is allowing others to care for you too. And so I thank you for that. And so can you just talk a little bit about what it was like to write that piece, you know, and if anyone has anything you want to respond with, that would be great. But first tell us about writing it. Yeah.
I mean, it was really confronting. I remember feeling like a jar with like sediment at the bottom that had just been shaken up. After I was like, oh, I brought up all this stuff. And I would actually say that the piece was the beginning of what ultimately will be a longer memoir piece about me and my mother's relationship, because what I got clear was like, oh, there's so much to unpack in our story and the dance, right? Like that my mother in even in the midst of her addiction was trying to make sure we still had a Christmas in the best way that she could figure out in all of, you know, all the ways that she was struggling at that time. And there was a way in which that sort of parentification of our relationship just lasted for most of our relationship. But at the same time, I got both this like, oh, I'm a grown up now, right? Like, and I get to do this really grown up thing. And the world being like, not only are you not a grown up, but you're probably a little thief. And so all of this message about like, can I trust myself to have anything? Should I have anything? And when I wrote this piece, I was just sort of starting to have a breakthrough around like, oh, maybe I'm allowed to have plenty. Maybe not just enough. Maybe I'm allowed to have plenty. And yeah, it was really a seminal moment in beginning to unpack that dynamic with my mother and just getting over that sort of crisis level around my own relationship with money.
Yes. And now do you feel definitively like you can have plenty?
I'm good. Bring it all. Rain down.
Bring it all.
May all the abundance rain down upon me on a regular basis. Just may it all come and may it continue to come.
I think that is really so important. You know, I did one of the first in-person events for this book the other night at an incredible bookstore, Charis. I love you, and this is a sister bookstore for you all. But it's called Reparations Club, and it's here in LA, and it's Black owned, Black women owned. It is amazing. And it was interesting to have the conversation with so many women of color who were all mostly talking about how they had been exposed. You know, here we are in Hollywood. So a lot of them were in writers' rooms. They were working, you know, in the business. And they had been exposed to so many wealthy people who were so repugnant to them, who they felt a kind of aversion to because of the value systems that these people were expressing in these rooms and they were having these experiences with. And their response was so fascinating to me. And we really worked on it. We talked about it the whole time. Many of them had the response of, I don't want to have money.
Right.
Because if I have money, I'm going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be like that. And so I should have no money because that will mean I'm a good person. And if I have money, I'm going to end up like a terrible person. And I, of course, was, you know, not about that. So we had a deep conversation about, you know, that is not, you know, that is them. And what we do with money is going to be something different. And you have to decide who you're going to be with that money, but welcome it because you need to be able to use that money to make the world that you want to make. I mean, it's so obvious, you know,
Yeah.
But I think it's important to articulate that when what we see so much of this, like rapacious, you know, the greed, you know, it seems as if the money is doing that to the people, but it's not. It is, but it's also not, because when we get it, we can make different decisions because of who we are. And what we
it's a magnification, right? Money is a magnifier. So whatever it is that's already in you, money is going to amplify whatever that is. And if money becomes a substitute for self-worth, if money becomes a substitute for how I understand myself as good enough in the world, then yes, then money becomes the thing that you have to amass. I mean, there's the reason we have an Elon Musk and a Jeff Bezos, right? Because their understanding of whether or not they are centrally enough as human beings comes from how much they can amass and keep and control and use. But if you actually, and it's the reason I do radical self-love work, is because if you understand yourself as inherently enough, then money just becomes a tool by which you get to manifest the things you desire to contribute to the world.
Exactly. Period. End of story. And so we all need to just get with that program. And, you know, thank you. Just get, you know, and really, you know, it's complicated because we are in the midst of hyper-capitalism. We are in the midst of late-stage capitalism. We are in the midst of a system, but we are so in it. We cannot imagine that somehow we can step outside of it and somehow be victorious over it. Like it's just not, it's not going to work. So it's a matter of how do we engage in a way that is everything you just said, Sonya, in alignment with our higher values and purpose and who we are. And that's not always easy, but I think that for many of us, I mean, Mandy, when you talk about your grandmother, you know, she had a plan, she knew what she was doing, you know. And I think when all four of us can talk about our grandmothers, I'm sure, and the plans that they had and what they did with their money and what they knew they would do if they had more, you know. And it is not taking something from somebody else. It is not doing those things that we so despise and are hurt by. So anyway, so I want to support that out there, all of you listening. I think it's a really important message, and that's you know, one of the big messages of this book is to really understand that there is meaning to be made from your experiences with money, your money story, and that hopefully when you process through some of what you're carrying, you will be able to make better decisions about money that are in alignment with your vision for the future and for yourself and your family and your community. But until you work through those knots, it's very hard to do that. because you're still living in a constricted way that that separates you from this openness that we're talking about. So I know the time is getting short. I want to take some questions, if there are some questions before we close, right? It's 5, oh my goodness, because we could talk forever. I want to hear more, this is everything to me. But let's see here. Are there questions? Okay. I'm wondering if you've ever talked. Okay, here's a question for me. Rebecca. Oh, it's Jody. Hi, Jody. A dear friend and colleague and wonderful writer from Spalding, where we teach together. Rebecca, I haven't seen all your presentations, but I'm wondering if you've ever talked about what your mother and her experience taught you about money. What did you learn from her or her experience, and what have been some of your deliberate choices as a result? Okay, that's a great question. Well, my mother wrote a great foreword to this book. I'm so happy and honored that she did that. It was a lot of fun to work with her on it. Again, I think I touched a little bit on it. My mother is, my parents. I'm a biracial Black woman. My father is Jewish. Both of my parents are first generation college educated. My mother came from sharecroppers. Her mother was a domestic. My father's mother was a bookkeeper who had 6 jobs and raised her 3 boys as a single mother in Brooklyn. So I learned, so there was a lot going on about money. But I think from my mom, as we touched upon, it is so important to use money to feed one's spirit. And for her, feeding one's spirit is about being connected to land, to the earth, to beauty of all kinds, all the natural beauty, all of that. And I think that for me, money is inextricable from that experience, that is key. I also, again, as we also discussed, for her, as someone who was the child of sharecroppers, who was constantly removed from where she lived, told she had to leave, there was no ownership. I have learned a lot about owning land and really putting money into not just making sure that I can be in control of where I live, because redlining, even though we don't call it that anymore, still exists. And I want to make sure that I, have my 40 acres, whatever that looks like, because I deserve that, and because that's what gives me safety, and that is what is important for my family and building intergenerational wealth. And I would think I would say the third thing from my mother is to believe in the constant movement and reciprocity of money. That my mother she does not hoard money in any way. She gives as much. I mean, my mother gives a lot of money away. Sometimes I'm like, Mom, but her natural instinct is, it comes in and it goes out, and she wants it. She gives it to a group of Jamaican women who need their own land so that they can have ceremony. To the American Indian movement, my mother's given her, to BLM, to Mumia, to the revolution in Cuba 30, 40 years ago. I mean, my mother, that is something that she has taught me, that you cannot hold it and think that it's going to be, that's it. That part of having more and plenty is giving, that it's the same, that it's in breath, out breath, and to believe in that. So she's really taught me those things, among others, and I'm very grateful. Okay, long answer to that question. 2 more questions. I really appreciate the prompt, Sonya, to rethink money as a magnifier. I'd love to hear of your thoughts on how we can reckon with the scarcity mindset that many marginalized communities carry, even when we are able to cultivate wealth, property, savings, etc. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can reckon with the scarcity mindset that many marginalized communities carry. It's very important.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, one of the key pieces has been recognizing that there is a money story, right? Like you can't even begin to deal with the scarcity thing until you actually identify, like, oh, there's a block that I have. And I like to, you know, for me, the entryway into all of those questions is assume that it is so. Like assume that you grew up in America as a person of a marginalized identity in a marginalized community. You got a money story because that's what this oppressive capitalist system was passing out to us was a money story. And so if I start from the assumption that there is a money story, then the work is to just get curious. All right, what were the lessons? What were the things that were shown to me? What was the, you know, what were the things? You got McDonald's money? Like how many Black people can relate to that, to that statement, right? Or, don't have money, don't grow on trees, you don't, right? So we all got these messages, and then starting to look at like, all right, where does that message still live today in my relationship with money? And what is it telling me? Is it telling me that there's not enough? Is it telling me that I'm not enough if I don't have it? Is it telling me that I've got to hold and control? Or is it telling me that like keeping up with the appearances of the Joneses is the thing? Get curious about what the message is inside of it. And then from there, you can start to backwards map. Because once you see that message, like then the question is it true? Right?
Right.
Is it true? And the is it true will bring up a whole bunch of other stuff, right? It'll bring up, yes, it feels really true because actually I haven't healed that relationship with my mother, right? It feels really true because I didn't say that thing to my dad or to my sibling, and then it gives you the actual work that's underneath it. And as you start to pull that apart, I feel like there's so much more that opens and that scarcity stuff starts to shrink at least.
Terese and Mandy, do you want to respond to either of those? Any of that? I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing Sonya talk. You know, it's so uplifting and it's so inspiring to hear positive messages for our not only our futures, but like our financial futures and what we can do if we love ourselves, you know, and take care of ourselves and actually make it actionable things we can do. And like I think, you know, for me, it's always hard because the scarcity mindset is kind of like everywhere. So even as like, you know, like even as Mandy was reading about her advance, it's like, oh my God, like I've seen those lists of who got what, and Black women, Indigenous women, Chicana, we're at the lower end of the advances in most cases. So it hurts your heart. And then you're like, whoa, but you know, like to be honest, like the end game for me was art and survival and resurgence and love and, you know, cultivating something I'm proud of for my children, you know, and like, hearing Mandy read also about her own grandmother, and I think like reconciling with a settler identity, it gives me hope that like someday the bridge will not, you know, someday we'll be able to cultivate art next to each other, you know, and we'll be paid equally. And it's like, you know, so the scarcity mindset, I feel like I have to meet that with hope and keep writing. And also understand that I've never, my auntie always said, like, you should only, you know, want what you need. You only need what you need. Like everything else, you can give it away, you can cultivate it, you can like create a, you know, a colony if you wanted to, or a co-op, like that's fine. But I don't know. I think a scarcity mindset, I just haven't paid attention to it. I really didn't think about it because I was like, no, my writing is good. This is good. I'm going to bet on it 100%. And becoming a New York Times bestseller, which, you know, like a lot of us have reached those goals and seen people who reach those goals. It's like, you know, to be honest, who knows who's going to be a bestseller, but I just, you know, when it happened, I thought, no, I'm surprised, but I'm not like flabbergasted. It's something that I, wanted. It's something I aimed for. It happened earlier than I wanted it to. But yeah, honestly, I think you should just believe in yourself, as
That doesn't
silly
sound
as it
silly.
sounds. And that, people, no, and that people like Mandy will help close the gap institutionally. Like, God, I hope so. Because it's hard.
It's so
hard.
interesting to hear you all talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a New York Times bestseller, but my book was a bestseller 20 years ago. So it's like it doesn't. It's such a different experience for me in some weird way that I can't even articulate. But I remember the moment of it happening and feeling like, wow, this is it, And now I don't, even then, but even more now, for me, I really enjoy making money. I enjoy asking for the money that I believe I deserve. I enjoy saying no to people who don't want to give me the money that I feel I deserve. Like, I am really comfortable with all of that. And I also feel now as a writer, and I did then too, as I said, but I really write for my readers. I care about you. I care about you. And that's my wealth. That to me, when it comes home, when at the end of the day, when it's all, I mean, money's real. And the thing that fills me up is knowing that the work that I've done, the writing, the cultivating, all of it has changed and helped and affected somebody else's life. That's it. And has forwarded the conversation in the culture in some minor or major way. That is and when I think about having a good death, I know that will be the thing that makes me feel as if I have had the most plenty of all, So it's so interesting to think about the bestseller thing. But I would love for my next book to be on the bestseller list again. This book could be on the bestseller list. It would be so fun, right? Because but mostly because it means people are reading it and getting it and engaging it. So, but Mandy, I want to hear your voice a little bit before we have to go. How are you feeling about this conversation? How are you doing?
I'm good. No, I mean, when I sent my essay to you, I felt so uncomfortable putting that dollar amount in there. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then, when the book came out again, a couple years passed and the book came out and I thought, oh shit, people are going to see this number again. And so, I think like the thing that I guess reminds me that like, it's okay, is this feeling that, that actually it's the right thing to do. Like that this transparency is essential to, as you guys were saying, like creating the kind of world that we want to live in, and being, especially when the publishing paid me hashtags circulated a few years ago, and people were sharing on Twitter their book advances, and mostly Black folks and people of color, and sort of looking at the disparities. And I thought, okay, I've written an essay about this. I have to share it on Twitter. And that like I wanted to die. I was so uncomfortable sharing that. Roxane Gay retweeted my tweet because I had replied to her, and then my tweet ended up like in the New York Times, and I was like, here I am, like the literal face of white privilege in the New York Times today. And it was just like it's so uncomfortable. And yet at the same time, I do think like the only way, I mean, there are lots of things that people in position of privilege can do, but I think like the starting point, like beginning, is like we just have to start talking about it. And yeah, I don't ever feel comfortable talking about it, but It's getting easier. Yeah, I'm getting a
Good.
little bit
And what
better.
are you do you have
Yeah.
a sense of like a practice around that position? Like in addition to talking about it? I mean, it's something I think about a lot because
Yeah.
I
So
have
I mean,
I
this,
have a tremendous amount of privilege, I feel, and I like, I think it's important for me to acknowledge
mhm.
that and to talk about it and to think about how I use it. So I wonder, how are you thinking about how to deal with that?
Yes. Yeah. That's a great question. It's something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. And I think what I want to do right now, I'm on maternity leave, so I am living on a very small fraction of my salary, but um, I'll be back to work in September. One of my goals is to create a practice of secular tithing. I've been reading about this. I grew up in the church, and that was a part of my childhood, and then I sort of like let that go, and I've been thinking about that as a way of just like fighting my own sense of scarcity. I mean, I feel scarcity all the time. I think because I got used to just like hoarding whatever money came my way so that I could buy time to write. And so the only way to train myself to let that go has been to start giving money away. And I've done it in a really haphazard way, but I want to do it in a more structured way. And so for me, that's the practice that feels most exciting. So
Great.
that's what
Great.
want
I
to
think
do.
being transparent and doing that. And
Yeah.
we have a great piece in the book by Rachel Cargle, who has an incredible practice. I mean, she's done a lot of different interesting things with money. And one of the things that I love is the creation of a fund that supports mental health for Black women, that she has created a place where people can give money to help Black women get therapy that they need, and she's done these multiple interesting interventions with money that I think are unbelievable. And her interview is really wonderful in the book. So I'm really glad that she's there. I think we're being told that we need to be quiet. Does anybody want, not that we need to be quiet, but we need to move it along. Does anybody want to say anything else in closing? Buy the book. No, go ahead.
You're on mute, Terese.
Teresa,
I didn't know. I didn't know if I could control my mute or not. So I don't know if you heard my son playing his game the whole time or okay. Oh, I just wanted to say when you were talking about like text, living forever, that all we have is the cultivation of our work, and like that's it resonating with readers is what matters most. I was just thinking like I don't know, I kind of want New York Times bestseller on my like gravestone. I'm sorry.
Go, girl.
I'm just
We'll
kidding.
make
But
that.
yeah.
Why
But yeah, this was lovely. I really loved hearing everybody's work. And, especially, it's just, I think at any point in time, these conversations really fill me up because I think we're always dealing with this issue, how to handle our money, how to survive and create continuance.
Yes.
Thank
And
you,
how to
Rebecca.
celebrate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I want that to be on your headstone or your tombstone. I mean, honey, I'm here for that. Just New York Times bestseller, God damn it. I mean, why not? I mean, that we need to own it at that level, because they do. And that's how it keeps it moving, So anyway, beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else want to say goodbye or anything?
Just thanks for having us. And thanks for visioning into the world this particular piece of work that is so very necessary.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm supposed to do, support joy, support women having money, making money, talking about money. As I said last night, the algorithm that we are now using as a euphemism for white supremacy does not want to have us looking all the time at women talking about money, making money, spending money, being into money, being moneyed. So the algorithm is really showing us a lot of women in poverty and despair and people of color in brutality. So it is our job, really. I mean, if we, to try to shift the algorithm, and the way that we shift the algorithm to show us things like Black joy, Black wealth, female empowerment, all of these things that we're talking about, is to shift that algorithm through buying things that support those messages, using your money to shift the algorithm in our direction, the direction of health. So please do buy the book, buy it from Charis, and I hope to see you all again. So ER, you want to close us out, honey?
I mean, I couldn't say it any better, except just click this teal button at the bottom of your screen to buy the book directly from Charis. One click, it's very easy. And since you brought up secular tithing, Charis Circle is a nonprofit. All of our programming is funded through our 501c3s, so you can secularly tithe to Charis. And I will say some of the folks who have the deepest ongoing commitment to Charis Circle, our nonprofit, are folks who came out of religious backgrounds and have a habit and practice of tithing, and have brought it to the secular world, even though they are not religious anymore. So I have found that is a really wonderful way to support nonprofits and community organizing. So thank you for bringing that into this space. Thank you all so much for your beautiful writing, your important words. Thank you for everybody in the chat being with us tonight. I hope that everybody stays safe and well, and that you have lots of abundance in your life, whatever that looks like. So until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, y'all.
I'm so impressed by how easy Charis made it to give y'all money just now. It was so easy.
I know.
I just gave y'all money so easy.
I know. I gave you money in like this much time. That was genius. We all need to do that. Let's figure that out. Okay, y'all.
Hey.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you so much.